Hello, hello. Welcome back to Mistress of the Damned. If you are new here, welcome. This is where we believe that all knowledge is worth having and freedom of speech is our most important right. If you believe that too, then you too are damned. I am your Mistress Katrina. Welcome to hell. Now, several times over the last few weeks, I have hinted that August was going to be a depressing month. This was going to be a rough month. And here's why. I decided several weeks ago that I was going to spend the month of August vacillating between insane outrage and suicidal depression by jumping headfirst into the world of Alexander Solzhenitsyn. So last week, I reviewed his One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich. Continuing the darkness throughout the month, I am now reading my way through the Gulag Archipelago. And because we never half-ass our pursuit of knowledge, I am reading the unabridged version, which totals a little over 1,800 pages. Now, fortunately for me, it is broken down into 3 convenient volumes to be read through 1 volume per week, making this week's Book of the Week, The Gulag Archipelago, Volume 1, by Alexander Solzhenitsyn. What can be said about the Gulag Archipelago?
It's like I took the wrong week to quit drinking.
Okay, now that I've bolstered myself, let's do this. 1,800 pages is a lot of information to absorb. So much so I've actually started a blog, which I'll include a link in the description to kind of help me process the information as I learn it. And I'm kind of liking it. I think I'll keep that going as I work through all my books in the future because it's, whew, the whiskey just hit, whew. Because it's pretty nice having an ongoing journal of my knowledge journey. Plus, it really helped me to reconstruct this week's review, so that was useful. So I'll probably just keep that going. One of the first things that struck me about this book is that it's not just an autobiography. There's that, all right, we do find out Solzhenitsyn's story as we're going along. But more than that, he's telling the stories of the other inmates. He's giving them voice, a voice that would have been buried under the bureaucracy that was the Soviet Union if he hadn't done it for them. And while telling the story of the other inmates, he's providing us with this overarching history of the Gulag system in Soviet Russia. And he starts with arrest, because arrest is terrifying, right? For most people, the concept of being arrested is horrifying, right? Most of us try very hard to live within the law, which is not easy in a nation that keeps making more and more laws and making it illegal to do everything. But we're sure as hell trying, and they sure as hell tried in Soviet Russia. No, don't drink whiskey. Cats don't need whiskey. So it starts with arrest. What is so scary about this process, especially in this book, is that so few people were arrested and directly told, hey, you're under arrest. Okay? I mean, here in America, we pretty much have that expectation that if we're going to go down, we're going to know exactly what we're under arrest for, and that was just not the case. You might think that you want to date with somebody, only to find that the date ends at Lubyanka prison. That's the cat enjoying a plastic bag. He's not going to hurt himself. It's a tiny little plastic bag. It's holding screws. Well, okay, not even screws, wall anchors. So, I know, I sound like such an irresponsible cat parent. That's okay. I don't think they put people in gulags for being irresponsible cat parents. They put them in gulags for everything else, but not for that. So, you might think you're on a date with somebody and find the date ends at Lubyanka prison. One man was arrested at the funeral of his child. Or you might be greeted at work with the news that you had won a company vacation, so you should go home and pack. So you'd run home and pack, and you get your wife and get everything packed up, head to the train station, and find out that you were actually just being shuffled onto a prison-bound transport. Solzhenitsyn's arrest occurred in the middle of World War II on the front line. Like, he was literally in the trenches when he got called to his commander's office and was told that he was being placed under arrest. And then the most extraordinary thing happened. He asked his commander why, and his commander actually told him, which he was not supposed to do, like most emphatically, but he did. He at least gave him a hint. He said something about the mail, and Solzhenitsyn then knew that letters that he had written to a friend had been opened and read by state censors. The letters were mocking of Stalin, and so arrest. Between arrest and questioning, Solzhenitsyn takes us on a tour of the sewage disposal system No, this was not a discourse on Russian plumbing. The sewage being disposed of were the political undesirables, and they were disposed of in mass waves just about every 10 years, or 5 to 10 years. They would determine what else was undesirable and round them up. First it was the other revolutionaries who did not quite agree with Lenin's proposals, so yes, the socialists turned on other socialists. Then the intelligentsia, those who were capable of analyzing the policies being recommended and seeing those far-reaching consequences, they were rounded up. It's funny because at first Lenin actually recommended that they be exiled from Russia. And I think I actually even get why. I think that his thought was, we'll exile them, and then once they see how fabulous things are here in Russia, they'll want to come back, and we won't let them. We'll just gloat about it. But what happened is they ended up being so thankful that they were being exiled from the coming shit show that he decided instead to imprison them and send them to the work camp so they could help build the workers' paradise of communist Russia. Didn't happen, obviously, but he ended up rounding up the intelligentsia, arresting them, chucking them into camps. Churchmen, landowners, dissenters, anyone who disliked the Lenin-Stalinist policies, their families, their friends, sometimes friends of friends. If you knew someone in prison, you were likely to end up in prison yourself, and everyone knew someone who was in prison. That is how far-reaching this particular catastrophe was. Mainly because the most common violation was in Article 58, and I think it had subsets 1 through 14 with alphabets attached for specific examples. So, for example, a 58-1A meant civilians who had lived among the Germans. Essentially, if you lived in occupied territory during World War II, you were automatically guilty of this violation. Military personnel who had been prisoners of war were hit with 58-1B. He told one story of somebody who was at Buchenwald, got out of Buchenwald, barely survived that, because it's not like the Germans were any nicer to the Russians for being prisoners of war. Barely survived Buchenwald, got back to Russia, and was immediately chucked in because how could he have survived Buchenwald if he hadn't betrayed people? Isn't that twisted? So, yeah, that poor guy had a really miserable life. Learned the Soviets were really creative with torture. Solzhenitsyn categorizes at least 32 different methods of torture that he knew of, and he recounts those in detail in the book. And he recalls meeting somebody who knew of at least 52. The one that struck me and quite literally made my ass pucker is they would starve a man until the fat had dissolved from his body, and then beat him with a board across the buttocks. Now, what this means is that without fat padding your ass, they were basically striking that sciatic nerve directly. As anybody who's ever had a sciatic pain before knows, that the sciatic nerve is really sensitive. And as someone who basically read this book lying flat on my back due to sciatic nerve pain, I cried in sympathy for the long dead victims of this particular torture. And that was just one way. I mean, they would make people stand for literally a week at a time. They'd put them into these tiny little box cells where you didn't even have room to sit. But if you leaned against the walls, the guards would yell at you. So there was sleep deprivation. That's a fun way of torturing people. It's actually against Geneva Conventions for a reason. Yeah, you'll go insane without sleep. No one got through interrogation without torture. The interrogators already knew what they wanted you to say, and they were very adept at getting you to say it. Between torture and work camps, you landed in your first prison. This was practically a vacation because they gave you were guaranteed food, which you didn't have to work for, which meant that even the paltry amount they gave you was enough to sustain you because your caloric expenditure was minimal. Okay, they would probably feed you maybe 1,200 calories a day. Remember, the recommended daily allowance is 2,000, and that's for somebody who's a fairly sedentary lifestyle. If you're doing heavy labor, if you're working in a lumber yard cutting down trees, or if you're mining or farming, anything that's really heavy labor intensive, not just sitting on your ass talking into a camera, but labor intensive, you want to up that caloric intake by 1,000 to 2,000 calories. So ideally they should have been fed around 3,000 calories a day, 3,000 to 4,000 depending on the individual and body portion. And so they were barely fed starvation rations when they were working. That's, the entire country was starving. They're not going to waste much on prisoners, especially when they can just make more of them by making new laws. The other blessed thing about being in the prison prior to transport is you were allowed to talk to your fellow inmates. Even knowing that there was a state snitch in the cell, and there were always state snitches in the cells, that communication was desperately needed. It is, in fact, entirely possible to die of loneliness. I think that this last year of forced isolation, forced on us, and the rampant number of suicides as a direct result of that forced isolation lets people know exactly how much communication with your fellow man is needed. Solzhenitsyn spent a significant portion of Volume 1 explaining the key trials of the 20th century that resulted in the total loss of freedom of the Russian people. Those trials started in Lenin's time. Now, this is important to understand because so many of the useful idiots today who want democratic socialism think that Lenin got it right. If only he had lived a little longer and Stalin hadn't taken over, the whole sorry shit show in Russia would totally have turned out differently, and it was totally the fault of Stalin. It was not. The whole sorry shit show in Russia can be traced all the way back to Marx and his shitty ideas. Seriously, kids, that lazy piece of garbage literally never worked a day in his life, okay? He spent his entire life sponging off of Engels. He knew fuck all about money and how to live and thrive and make more of it. All he knew was envy and greed and jealousy of other people's success because he never bothered to go out and seek success himself. His was truly a credo of jealousy based on taking from others what they genuinely earned. Don't believe me? I mean, ask the kulaks. Oh, wait, you can't ask the kulaks. You know why? Because they were forcibly starved to death by Lenin and Stalin, whose policies resulted in cannibalism, just like Mao Zedong in China. And kulak used to simply mean peasant. The Soviets changed the meaning to fit their narrative and to justify government theft of private property. And that is where some of the truly chilling lessons from this book come from. Think of how many times, that changing of words, think of how many times the left has changed the meaning of something to fit their narrative. Think of the demands they make that we're all in this together while working so very diligently to split us all into different classes of people. The chapters on the trials were especially informative because what else is cancel culture than the attempt to try people in the court of public opinion? And the Soviets publicly tried people, but it was quite obvious even then, and Solzhenitsyn does a masterful job mocking these trials because those were for show only. They were scripted by the people in power, and only very few of those who were accused went against the script. Those that did were heroes, though. And they knew they were going out, and they figured they're going to go out in a blaze of glory. And they told their stories. They screamed it from the trial bench, and they were heroes. Same can be said of cancel culture, right? The outraged mob screams for someone's head. The bold refuse to back down and inevitably come back as stronger with more supporters than ever before. But the foolish majority follow the script. They apologize, and then they vanish into obscurity, just like those in the Gulag systems. And the results are used to divide us even further by the political elites. The woke mobs wish they had the power of the Soviets to make everyone who disagrees with them just vanish. They're trying. Gulag. Gulag. But isn't that an interesting Freudian slip there? Google, Facebook, and Twitter. They're helping. They're trying very hard to make people who disagree with the narrative disappear. But the advantage we have in America is a very long history of speaking our minds. Rights that didn't really exist anywhere that socialism has been tried. There are a lot of places socialism has been tried. I know that the left likes to scream, that's not real socialism. Real socialism hasn't been tried. Yes, it has, and it's failed everywhere it's been tried. Because it's a credo of failure. You cannot succeed while pushing failure. That is probably why trying socialism here in America is proving so challenging to the illiterates who think that socialism should exist here. An awful lot of us are screaming no right back at them. All of that is in this book. Okay. Not the bit about Marx being an idiot. That's my own personal rant and belief, but it's kind of hinted at. It's not directly said, but it's kind of hinted at that Marx was a fuckwad. Okay. Apparently I get kind of angry and heated, or maybe I shouldn't have had that shot of whiskey, but wrong week to quit drinking. That's it for this week. Those are some of the lessons I observed from Volume 1. Don't forget to check out the companion blog. Link is in the description for additional thoughts on the book of the week. Next week, we will continue our travels through the Gulag Archipelago in Volume 2. I do this for you guys. Don't forget to like and share my videos. Hit that subscribe button. Let me know what you think in the comments, and I will see you next week. Bye.